All right, happy Thanksgiving, happy Black Friday. Don't waste all your money on material items. Though, if you must, go over to AmericanDope.com and you can use the code at checkout FridayBlack for 30% off on everything. So, I'm finally going to chime in on the Tekashi situation. Now, I'm not going to say this is what he has coming, he's going to get beat up in jail, etc. I thought that this would be an interesting opportunity to talk about the RICO law. So we're going to look at Tekashi and Treway's charges, and I want to use that to discuss the RICO law. Everyone's heard of it. You probably don't know the history of it, or maybe you do. So it stands for the Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act. It was passed in 1970. Now, it totally was meant to go after true organized crime, the Italian Mafia. For those of you who know about the Mafia, or if you want to watch some of my works on the Mafia, Killing Jimmy Hoffa, one of my favorite projects I've done. You can watch it all on YouTube or on Amazon, or you can buy it on AmericanDope.com. Starting probably after World War II, all the way up through early 80s, the Italian Mafia truly was a shadow government in many parts of the United States. I mean, especially certain cities, New York, Chicago, Detroit to a lesser extent. Interesting to note that the FBI in the 60s and 70s considered the single most powerful mafia boss in the country, Carlos Marcello in New Orleans. A lot of people don't know New Orleans even had a mafia family. The New Orleans mafia family actually was the oldest in the country, and they really weren't answerable to the Mafia Commission in New York. Of course, Carlos Marcello is he's at the center of the most credible conspiracy theory of the murder of JFK. But back to Tekashi. So, RICO basically means, in layman's terms, let's say I make a couple of my friends get tattoos to say Prophet Boys, right? So me and 3 or 4 guys are the Prophet Boys, and we run around and we yell out Prophet Boys, and we spray paint it on the wall. And to up my street cred, let's just say, so I get more views on YouTube and sell more DVDs, maybe sometimes some of my friends crack somebody in the head with a champagne bottle, or they shoot somebody and they yell out Prophet Boys. And then maybe one of my friends he pimps, but it doesn't have anything to do with me, but he's a pimp. And another guy sells drugs. And again, I don't even really know he's selling drugs, but he sells drugs. If a federal prosecutor decides he wants to rig us up in a RICO case, it's pretty easy to do, because it's easy to make the case, which is what they made with Tekashi and Treway, that my friend pimping, my friend selling drugs, shooting people and yelling out Prophet Boys is all part of a strategy to help Al Profits make money, right? It gives me credibility in the street, quote unquote. So we're all engaged in a money-making endeavor called the Prophet Boys, and different people commit crimes at different times in furtherance of that, even though we may not be aware of each other's crimes. So this was designed because the Mafia had created a brilliant system that they actually enforced, where the boss of a Mafia family, let's say Carlo Gambino, he personally really didn't commit any crimes. He would never tell anybody, kill so-and-so, sell heroin over here. First of all, the boss of a Mafia family is only going to talk to 1, 2, 3 people. The consigliere, and probably in the big families, Detroit had it, I'm sure the New York families had it, someone called sort of a street boss or the underboss. And the underboss would talk to the capos, and the capos talk to the soldiers. A soldier would not be even interacting with the boss. He may get to see him at a Christmas dinner for 5 minutes or something, but no Mafia boss is going to tell even a made member of the Mafia, go shoot somebody in the head. So these Mafia bosses were not really committing crimes. They really weren't even participating in criminal conspiracies. They would maybe lay out a vague ground rules of what should be happening, and the underbosses would talk to the capos, and then specific crimes would be discussed. And then as long as money was being kicked back up the food chain and the boss, Carlo Gambino in our example, received money, then everything was okay. So if a guy is not participating in actual crimes himself, and he's not even really participating in conspiracies, how do you bring him down? Well, you need the RICO Act. And of course, at this time, and still, the mafia had its tentacles into the construction business, waste hauling, which is really more lucrative than selling drugs, right? I mean, if you can, well, for example, in New York City, when Rudolph Giuliani went against the Mafia Commission in the mid-'80s, they used the RICO. That was one of the first really huge successful uses of the RICO Act. There was an estimated 20% mob tax on all construction of any buildings in New York City, including Donald Trump buildings, of course. And it simply worked like this. If, say, the glass workers union is controlled by the Gambino family, the Gambino family can have someone, a representative, well, not even of the Gambino family, of the glass workers union, talk to a builder of a huge skyscraper in Manhattan, give him the bid, and the builder, who may have never built in New York before, would say, well, gee, this is like 20% more than it should cost. And the glass workers union would say, that's the price. And nobody else will do, you can't end around us. No one else is going to do this work because things will happen. So how do you stop that? The RICO law. And for example, I remember going to visit my aunt and uncle in New York in the late 80s. And my uncle was a professional photographer, and he had a small studio space he rented in Manhattan just for his photography. And he told us the story about how when he moved in the building manager said trash removal is $50 a month. My uncle was a photographer. He didn't really make any trash, or he'd have a little waste paper basket once a week, right? He'd pick it up, throw it out himself. So he told the building manager, because he thought it was optional, yeah, I don't need the trash service. So the building manager said, well, here's a card. You can call Vinny, and you can talk to Vinny about it. My uncle called Vinny, and Vinny said, okay, I'll drop it to $45 a month. Don't call me again. Now, was my uncle going to be assaulted if he didn't pay $45 a month? Of course not. He would just have been evicted from the building, because the building manager is responsible for turning in $50 a month for every unit in the building. So say you have 100 units, that's $5,000 a month from one building. If the building manager doesn't turn in the money, he's not going to be assaulted either, but say all the windows are going to get smashed out and other things which are going to cost him a lot of money and not going to be worth the hassle, so you just pay the money. So that's $5,000 a month and 100% profit from one building in New York. Multiply that by hundreds or thousands of buildings, and you're talking about $10 million a month in just literally free money. Vinny comes around once a month, he picks up with the builder, or once a week, he picks up with the building manager, owns them. So RICO was passed in 1970 specifically to stop the mob, but there was a lot of debate in Congress as the law was being passed, and lawmakers who didn't want to pass the law because they realized how dangerous it is, because it gives a federal prosecutor a tremendous amount of discretion. And throughout the 70s and into the 80s, the federal prosecutors, they didn't really use it much. I think it was first used in 79, actually. And then it started to get used in the 80s. Drug dealers already fell under CCE, the 848 law, running a continuing criminal enterprise. So that's for drug dealers. RICO can be used against drug dealers, but it's for other things. So Rudolph Giuliani used RICO to kind of smash the Mafia Commission in the mid-'80s. He put Fat Tony Salerno, Carmine the Snake Persico, some other bosses of families in prison for 100 years. Of course, it didn't end the mob, but it did significantly change the way they operate and made them less powerful permanently. Back to Tekashi. So if you read the charges, first of all, they do one thing that prosecutors like to do. They mention a whole bunch of stuff, that no one's even charged with, right? It says Treyway was selling heroin and fentanyl and MDMA and weed. Well, no one's charged with that. That's just called alleging a crime. So if you're in an indictment, for example, a case I know a lot about, the Best Friends in Detroit, which is a murder for hire / drug dealing ring in the 80s. When they were put on trial, their indictment happened. Individuals in it were charged with multiple mini murders, 10, 12 murders. But in the case, I think one of the lawyers said there were 45 murders alleged, meaning they were mentioned. No one was ever charged with them, but they're mentioned as part of painting this picture of a criminal organization. And that happens to people all over the country all of the time. So that's what the drug charges they're not charges. The mention of illegal acts involving drugs in the Treyway Tekashi case are. They're alleging it, they're painting a picture of Treyway as a criminal organization. So they say, well, there's Treyway records, but there's the 9 Trey Gangster Bloods who all around the country at different times, different members have been indicted and convicted of all sorts of things from murder to drug dealing and other things. So now you've connected these 5 guys to the crimes of many other people just because they're saying 9 Trey Treyway. Then if you read the actual charges, all they are is the stuff that we all saw on the news where they caught the one guy shooting at somebody at the Barclays Center, some assaults, brandishing a firearm. Now, how is that RICO? Well, as we all know, us, music, hip-hop aficionados, Tekashi is sort of like a Frankenstein creation. So because of his look, you can attract, maybe an audience that wouldn't necessarily always listen to rap, more of a rock, metal, maybe whiter kind of audience, right? But then he's rapping about gangster rap stuff. And if you like gangster rap stuff, he's no worse than Rick Ross. I didn't mind listening to Tekashi songs when I was in that mood. But when you see him, his voice doesn't really match, right? And then if you're from the hood, a street guy, you don't want to listen to Slim Jesus. So it was really brilliant how they took this kid who looked, like a rock star and could attract this larger audience. Now you stick him on, a stoop in Brooklyn with real, gang members behind him. And you put him in the lion's den. You have him go out to L.A. and say, I don't need a pass. And you surround him with gang members in L.A. so he's protected. And you do all these things. Now, when you're really dealing with real gangsters, gang members, street people, guns do have to be bust, at least on occasion. And at the Barclays Center, and I think in some other incidents, guns were shot. No one was even killed in the indictment. But Tekashi's problem is this. He was there for most of these incidents. They have him on camera with the person who then shot at somebody at Barclays Center. And then something I don't remember seeing in the news or know about, supposedly that scum gang thing, Tekashi and some of the other people in the indictment saw somebody with a scum gang bag, around Times Square, put a gun on him, took the scum gang bag, got back into the car with Tekashi. When Tekashi's house was raided, that bag was there along with, I think, an AR-15. So how is this RICO? Well, if Tekashi is a Frankenstein character that needs real street cred in order to sell records to make money, then shooting someone at the Barclays Center, shooting at them, beating people up, assaulting people, brandishing firearms is part of Treyway establishing Tekashi as whatever you want to think of him as, which directly leads to money. So that is the RICO violation. Because Tekashi already has a felony conviction and was on probation, he faces life minimum 7 years on the full RICO charge. Now everybody likes to talk about the feds have a 95% conviction rate. It's really because most people cap out. The crimes in the Treway Tekashi indictment aren't in and of themselves. I mean, they're serious, but they're not that serious. There's no dead people. Again, the heroin stuff, it's mentioned, but there's no charges of it. There's a couple shootings. There's an armed robbery, there's an assault. Those are serious, but they're not things you're going to get life for. Supposedly now Tekashi has been put into a federal jail that's known for housing cooperating witnesses. Now, I didn't really follow the Tekashi stuff that tightly, but it was interesting to go back and see his most recent appearance on the Breakfast Club when he began distancing himself. He had fired Shotty, I guess, as his manager, and an incident had occurred when Tekashi in October went to court for a hearing on his probation violation, and he was not given jail time. He had a party at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan with his new management team. I guess his new manager was the son of Sir Lucian something, who's the president of Universal Records. A very powerful person. And for those of you who don't know what the word sir in front of somebody's name means, it means the Queen of England gave you knighthood. You've been knighted. You are officially part of the power infrastructure of the United Kingdom. So, Tekashi's having this party with his new management. Shotty and some of the other guys indicted show up. They hit people with chairs. And this is something I don't know if this was in the news. One of Tekashi's new bodyguards, who was an off-duty cop, shot, I think, Crippy, the guy Crippy in the indictment, shot Crippy. Crippy was taken into custody. So that any charge involved with that incident shouldn't be held against Tekashi, because that's allegedly Treway attacking Tekashi for leaving them and going with somebody else. Tekashi getting life or something for all this is pretty far-fetched, but he's at major risk because he's already on probation for a sex crime. So really he should be violated and given several years in prison just for that. I mean, I don't want that to happen, but just knowing, what happens to other people in the criminal justice system, that would be pretty normal, right? You're on probation and now you're in a RICO case. I mean, usually people would be automatically violated and sentenced right there. Tekashi was warned that Treway was going to super violate him, which according to the feds means he was going to be murdered. Now, here's another interesting aside. Often in these indictments, to decipher slang terms, wait, where's my vape pen? I had a vape pen I've been smoking. Oh, with nicotine. This is nicotine. I've gotten addicted to it. Nicotine's bad. So, allegedly the feds had a phone call where somebody, Treway, Shotty, I don't know, said, let's super violate Tekashi. So they probably had a federal law enforcement testify under oath to a judge that in his expert knowledge of gang terminology, super violate means murder. Perhaps. Tell you a personal anecdote. A friend of mine who's currently serving time for drug conspiracy, he let another friend of ours borrow his white Range Rover. Just borrow his white Range Rover one day. And the guy had on some new, True Religions or something, dark blue. Now, when you buy a new pair of jeans and you don't wash them first, you just wear them, sometimes some of the dye will seep off of it. So my friend called the guy and said, man, you stained my seats. They're not perfectly white anymore because you got them dirty. He really was talking about, you got my white Range Rover seats dirty with your new jeans, or not dirty, but ink. Feds got on the stand and said, oh, well, that was code for saying he had gotten some China white heroin that had already been cut. That's not true. I know that that's not true. So you have these middle-aged federal agents, usually white, but that doesn't really matter, giving expert opinion of what someone on a phone really means. So that's why the RICO is so dangerous. to have a federal agent get on the stand and say, well, I know they said 2 + 2 = 4, but really in their slang, 2 + 2 means kill Joe Blow. I mean, you could almost take anybody and put them in a RICO case if you wanted to, which is frightening, frankly. An aside about the city of New York, one of my New York friends I was talking to, Haitian guy, may or may not have been gang affiliated. I was discussing with him how there's so many RICO cases in New York that I'll read in the paper where they raid an entire projects, right? And they make it sound really bad. The such and such gang was terrorizing the Grant houses in Harlem and blah, blah, blah. And then you read the charges of what they're accused of, and it'll say over the course of 2 years, you know, there was 1 murder and 7 shootings and 200 grams of crack and $74,000 and 2 guns confiscated. Well, I mean, that's not really, I mean, is that a RICO case? Like, I was asking him, like, boy, the federal prosecutors are sure RICO happy now against just probably what are just groups of poor guys that live in the projects. Maybe some of them sell crack or guns or someone shot somebody, but they're certainly not organized. They're all petty criminals on their own, but you rig them up into a RICO. And I couldn't figure out, well, why are they doing this so much? And my friend told me why he thought, and I guess other people in New York, is part of gentrification. Because many of the public housing projects in New York, and for those of you not from New York, I think 1 out of 8 New York residents lives in public housing. All the public housing in New York is not ghetto or bad. Some of it is. Some is full of middle-class people. There's an all-Chinese public housing project. There's a public housing project where Robert De Niro grew up that's for artists, and you have to submit your paintings, your sculptures. You have to act out a scene from a play for them to determine, are you a real artist, for you to live in there. So a lot of these housing projects are now in areas that are becoming extremely valuable. And you have people living in them, older people, usually black or Hispanic, paying, you know, whatever, $800, $1,200 rent for 2-3 bedroom apartments, which would be $4,000 or $5,000 at market rate. And if you live in those, you have the right to pass it down to a child or grandchild. But housing and urban development in the 90s under Bill Clinton, and I know this because my father worked for Detroit Public Housing, and it was a big deal. If you're convicted of a felony, you can't even live in public housing. So if you have these public housing complexes on valuable land and you can't really get the people out, and the people can pass the right to live there down to their children and grandchildren, if you can stick the grandson or the son into one of these fake RICO cases, right? So you bring them in and you say, you're facing life. Let them sit in the Brooklyn Metropolitan Federal Detention Center for a couple weeks where El Chapo's at. And then you come in and say, tell you what, plead guilty and you can get probation, but you have a felony, but you get out of jail today. You don't have to tell on anybody, you just plead guilty to a felony. Who wouldn't do that? But now you can't live in that, you can't inherit the right to live in that project. So as they do that, they're setting it up so that in 3, 4, 5, 7 years, they can pretty much get everybody out of these public housing projects and, do a market rate development, which in some of these areas, built literally billion-dollar projects. So that's possibly how the RICO law is being used in a very inappropriate manner in New York. Now, lest you think just well-known rappers are being targeted, I have a personal connection to one. My father lives in the neighborhood where they were indicted. And then another one, some guys I know did some videos for him, and I know other people, different connections, etc. Smoke Camp and YNS, Young and Scantless, the Brightmore neighborhood in Detroit, my father lives. They were given RICO cases. You never heard of them. So it's not so much that they're watching people, it's that if you get mixed up in some real crimes, like Treyway apparently did, getting caught on camera shooting guns, now they're going to go back through your social media and they're going to piece it all together and say, oh, well, you guys keep saying the same name and etc. So now we can tie you all together. So really, you're just a bunch of petty criminals. But when you add, this guy sold a little crack to undercover, this guy had a gun, this guy killed somebody in West Virginia, this guy did this, and we combine all those crimes, it looks really bad on paper, and people get a long time in prison. What is Tekashi 6ix9ine's way out of this? He's probably going to have to, if he doesn't want to do a nice chunk of time, he's going to have to probably testify against Treyway. And Tekashi has painted himself in such a bad corner that even if he did that, you can't put Tekashi in witness protection. He's got tattoos on his face. You can't, hey, we're going to give you an apartment in Salt Lake City and you start your life over. He can't hide. Like, everyone knows who he is. It's certainly possible that the feds lied to Tekashi about his life being threatened by Treyway, as I mentioned earlier, about the whole testifying about the secret meaning of phrases. Who knows? That's certainly a good tool to use against somebody to get them to tell. Most people don't tell because they're scared of jail. I mean, if you're from a bad neighborhood, if you're used to running around with rough characters, jail is just like stepping out of your front door, right? I mean, I wasn't scared to go to jail because the people in there were the people from my block. People tell because they just had a baby and they want to see their baby grow up. Their grandmother has cancer and they don't want her to die while they're gone. Or the best one of all, hey, these guys you're protecting, they're having sex with your girlfriend. Or they want to kill you anyways. They're not your real friend. So they're putting all these pressures to play on Tekashi. You see what Troy Ave did. I mean, what Troy Ave did from his own perspective was the smart thing and the only thing he could do, but he has no rap career. So you're playing with fire when you talk all the gangster stuff because, something may happen. And then, especially in New York where there's cameras everywhere, if you haven't been to New York, it's a police state. I mean, the police sit on every corner. When I was doing Streets of New York, even years back, a documentary I did, I was in Brownsville, which is still a bad area. And the guys I was interviewing, former members of the Decepticons, the lowlifes, people who've been to prison, like real rough guys, they would not get off of their porch. I brought, I got a big bottle of Hennessy or Kvass or something for us to drink back in my drinking days. They would not get off their porch with the liquor because the police were sitting on every corner. And if you're away from your porch with open intoxicant, they're on you. So the police run the streets of New York, believe that. And there's cameras everywhere. They did a shooting at the Barclays Center. I have to say it doesn't look good. I can't see them all getting out of everything. Are they going to get life? No. They might not even get that much time. There's no murders in it or anything. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. It's been surprise after surprise with Tekashi. I do actually feel sorry for him to some degree. I think he fell victim to the same thing that happened to Tupac and Biggie, where, you come from the hood yourself, so you're used to guns and some wild activity, but there's different layers of it, right? You might have the neighborhood tough guy on your block. He has a gun, but he never shot anybody. But now you're running around with real people, Haitian Jack or whoever, who are really doing something on higher levels, and now they take you down to the federal holding facility and say, oh, well, these guys you're running around with, they're not just some clowns off the block. Things are moving in a major way, and you're in big trouble. I myself stopped doing rap videos and stopped even videotaping certain kind of people. People would hire me to videotape private events and stuff for them. And I got a call from the DEA. This was years ago. Well, not that many years ago. Some years ago in Detroit, someone had some money at the airport. My phone number was in something they had written down, so they started asking me about him. And then when he went to court to get his money back, which was legal money, they said, oh, well, you call this phone number all the time, my phone number, And that phone number, my phone number, is in this other case that was at the time was on the front page of the Detroit newspaper. And it being on the front page of the Detroit paper is a big deal. Because these were some other guys who I would videotape stuff for. Honestly, that's it. So I'm like, oh my God, my phone number is in. Now, of course, people call thousands of phone numbers, right? But because they were trying to piece something together and put some pressure on him, now they're mentioning my phone number in an indictment for things that I didn't make any money off of and wasn't a part of. And I said, oh man, I don't talk to many people on the phone like that. You know, I have made a degree of friendship with some of the people I interview, but I don't go hang around. I don't be on the phone with them all the time. You know, RICO is frightening, and the lawmakers that passed it knew it, and there was a debate about it. And, you know, if you get caught selling drugs to a cop, you got a gun, you're on camera shooting someone in the head, okay, go to trial, you get convicted. That's the rules of the game, you go to jail. But when you start allowing federal prosecutors to piece together disparate things and lump a bunch of people together into something that's really bad, it's frightening, because a lot of us who are not even criminals could be put into a RICO case. And then you'd be forced to plead to some minor, you know, a felony that you didn't do, just so you get out of the life sentence, or some people tell. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Tekashi. It looks like he tried to extricate himself from the situation too late, but hopefully the message of this for anybody out there, even if you're not involved in street activities, if you're even hanging around and you're being places with people that are moving in a serious way, be careful. And all this giving yourself a name stuff, dead. I often joke with some of the guys, older street people I know who were at a very high level in different cities, and we joke about, like, you know, who were the ones that got away, the ones who had bad nicknames. But if you had a catchy nickname, Supreme Team, White Boy Rick, Treyway, you're going to always be a target. So, best of luck to all the people in that indictment for Treyway and to Tekashi. But that's the RICO law. And it's a dangerous thing. I understand why they created it. The mafia was really affecting the economy of the entire United States, and something needed to be done. But that's why it's important that we as citizens we have to police the police and the feds. I don't think that, you know, very many federal law enforcement wake up in the morning saying, how can I put black people in jail today? Or how can I put so-and-so in jail today? Maybe some do, but they use the tools at their disposal. And another thing to remember about federal law enforcement especially, they're like anybody else. They want to get their name in the paper. If you're the federal prosecutor or assistant federal prosecutor who puts Tekashi in prison, that's something that goes on your resume. You get a promotion. When you retire and you want to write a book, that's something you can put in your book. When you want to do a speaking tour, that's something you can talk about and get money. So it's all driven by the quest for publicity and money. So just like Tekashi needed street backing to help his publicity and his money, federal prosecutors, it's useful for them also. So read up on the RICO law. Be careful. Don't do crime, period. But even if you're just hanging out with people who do, you need to think about it. Go on Amazon, watch some of my videos, search Al Prophet, White Powder, Black Power, Cold War, Heroin, Heat, Acid Dreams are the 3 episodes from American Dope. And I'm going to leave you with one last interesting thing. I've been having a very, very hard time running social media ads for my 3 new documentaries from American Dope, because the YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook artificial intelligences that scan them, not just visually, but for all the words being spoken in them, are telling me you're not authorized to run political ads, sensitive information. But all I'm talking about is stuff in the past, but the phrase government corruption, police, words like that are used a lot because that's what they're about. Those documentaries are really about the government's connection to large-scale criminal activity. So I'm being blocked from running ads from a lot of those things. So you need to buy them directly. Cold War, heroin, heat, white powder, black power, acid dreams, the prophet has spoken.